Hello, I'm Wayne Heili. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of Peninsula Energy. Peninsula Energy is an advanced uranium developer with projects based in the United States. Our Lance project is well positioned today to be one of the first of the uranium restarts that so many people are anticipating. The Lance project today is fully licensed. It's very well staffed. We have the majority of our operating staff in place. We've spent the last several years technically de-risking the Lance project, as our ambition is to transition it from an alkaline-based in-situ recovery producer to a low pH chemistry. And today we've completed our technical de-risking activities, and the main focus really for us is to complete some economic studies. We're guiding to release updated feasibility in the third quarter of this year, and then that'll pave the way for us to consider making a final investment decision on the restart of the Lance projects later in the second half of this year.
Wayne, thank you so much for the introduction. A pleasure to meet you. Great to have you on the show, so to speak. I'm a complete newbie when it comes to in-situ recovery, uranium roll front geology. So you're going to have to be gentle with me as I build my understanding on the project in the next half an hour.
Be happy to. Thanks, Merlin. It's a pleasure to be joining you today.
I think if you could, just for my benefit and perhaps for the viewers, just let's first of all talk a little bit about uranium roll front geology and kind of in-situ recovery, and then once we've done that, I've got a bunch of questions about the feasibility study and the change in processing. But do you have a map, perhaps, that you could just kind of orientate me kind of within Wyoming?
Certainly. Well, I guess I don't have the Wyoming map immediately available, but let me share with you a little bit on the.
There we go. I can see.
This is an image of the Lance project. So first of all, Merlin, the Lance project is located in the northeast corner of the state of Wyoming, and it is a traditional uranium roll front geology type, which is so common with the United States uranium production centers and deposits. Roll front deposits are formed at chemical boundaries where oxidizing water, which carries uranium, meets with chemically reducing soils or grounds underground. This is a great depiction of how a roll front occurs. You have surface water or rain entering into the groundwater system and flowing downstream. Rain and fresh water is typically oxidized, and oxidized water will carry soluble uranium in very low concentrations up until a point where it meets a chemically reducing boundary. And at that point, the water continues on, but it drops out metals like uranium, which chemically precipitate in a chemically reducing system. So what we have is large systems of groundwater carrying low concentrations of uranium until the point in which the uranium drops out, and that becomes a concentrating mechanism for uranium. Over the eons, centuries, a long time, millennium, the uranium concentrations get so, to be rich enough that it becomes a uranium deposit. Fundamentally, Merlin, just, the uranium is obviously then precipitated after the formation has been formed. So what you get is a chemical precipitation on a sand grain or on a rock. That uranium is.
So it's a coating around a cast,
right.
Or okay.
That's right. You create a coating on a sand grain, essentially, at these roll front boundaries, and that's interesting because in situ recovery then reverses the natural process. we take chemical oxidants, oxygen gas or hydrogen peroxide, and we introduce it into the system, and we pass water across that front, resolubilize the uranium, and in the process, then we recover the solubilized uranium. So we have a injection well pattern and a recovery well pattern, patterns. And I'll try and pull up a little slide for you there. Here, we have series of injection wells going across the host with the uranium ore body. And as that water crosses the ore body, it dissolves the uranium, and then we collect the water in recovery wells. So that's fundamentally how the in-situ recovery process works. And, to understand it as we're reversing a natural process of deposition chemically is a really fundamentally good understanding.
Okay, thank you. I've got two immediate questions. So the first question is that clearly your sandstone host is an aquifer because fluids can flow through it. And that roll front, that contact between the oxidized and the anaerobic, the chemical precipitation front, they can be, they're essentially kind of linear features within a planar structure. Is that more or less correct? I mean, or tubular features or kind of cylindrical.
That's right. Over the course of miles, you can have great lengths of roll fronts, in a regional groundwater system, where, you have, similar geology over a large region. The groundwater is introduced at the surface and passes underground, and yes, you have an aquifer where the uranium deposition is. And one of the characteristics that's really required for successful in-situ recovery is that aquifer continues to be permeable, that you're able to pump solutions across it.
That was the next question, because of course, in an evolving aquifer, you can get chemical precipitation, you can get silting up of, so that your permeability and your porosity and permeability must actually be maintained through geological time.
That's right. And formations that cement up, they may look like a roll front, and they may be a roll front, but they're not very good targets if they're cemented up, if you can't pump water across them. So, the best in-situ recovery projects are addressing a permeable host sandstone that has the uranium roll front.
Okay, and my quick Wikipedia Googling of the Powder River Basin tells me that there are two formations that are typically or have historically been developed for economic purposes in the Powder River. One is the Eocene, what's it called, the Wasatch Formation, and the other is the Paleocene Fort Union Formation. Are you in one or either or both of those? Yeah,
we address the Wasatch Formation. I'm trying to decide if we don't have a geological cross section, but actually this particular map, which shows the length of roll front interpreted on our project area. Really, here you have a boundary between the Fort Union and the Wasatch, and we're actually on the Fort Union side. Excuse me. You can see that on the map. But groundwater regionally here would be from east to west, the groundwater flow into the basin. So all of these red lines, which you see on this particular map, are boundaries where oxidizing water has found chemically reducing conditions. So this is a redox boundary map, and it's also really the high target areas for where you find uranium mineralization.
Sorry, just two questions. One is permeability in your experience relatively consistent or relatively variable along strike, and also inside the Lance project itself, there seems to be a clustering of those red lines. So could you perhaps explain that?
Yeah, the clustering of the red lines is due to depicting of multiple horizons with roll fronts. So, the graphics which I've shown you are simplistically, one roll front and one horizon, but oftentimes you'll get stacked roll fronts over multiple horizons in the same area. And that's why you see a lot of various roll fronts. The first question, I'm sorry.
Was variability on permeability, variability along strike.
You can have significant variability. In our case, we see good permeability from north to south. And Merlin, just for reference, one of the things that makes the Lance project particularly interesting is its scale. This project area is about 25 miles north to south and about 5 miles wide. So, this is a large scale project. The Lance project today, we've identified about 53 million pounds of JORC compliant resource. But, the geological assessment of this area is that it has the potential for 150 to 200 million pounds of uranium resource. And clearly over the years, we haven't drilled out all of the north to south. They've drilled enough to identify that the roll fronts exist, the boundaries, the oxidizing to reducing condition boundaries exist. But there's a lot of infill drilling that's required to take a resource from inferred to measured and indicated.
One of the things you mentioned right at the beginning was that to get the uranium off, I presume it's uraninite, to get the uraninite off the sand grain, you use oxygen or hydrogen peroxide. And that's, I think, been the traditional method of doing it. But you also mentioned that you, and I saw that the old feasibility study from 2018 was using a bicarbonate.
Alkaline conditions.
Alkaline conditions. And now you've switched to acidic. Can you explain that thought process? What was the change in thinking behind that?
Absolutely. Well, fundamentally on uranium chemistry, U+4 tetravalent uranium is insoluble, okay? And U+6 hexavalent uranium is soluble. So oxidizing from +4 to +6 puts the uranium in a soluble state. Initially, the very low concentrations of uranium carried by the groundwater met a chemically reducing front and went from the +4 soluble to the +6.
Got it.
And so we need to introduce, whether we're using alkaline chemistry or acidic chemistry, we need to introduce or make sure that the solutions we introduce are oxidizing, because the first step is to oxidize the uranium back to the soluble +6. Then the effectiveness of either alkaline chemistry or acidic chemistry is it comes into play. The acidic chemistry is more of a concentrated solution leach. We form uranyl sulfates, so the uranyl ion is soluble and free in solution. And in order to prevent it from dropping back out on its journey from the injection well to the recovery well, we complex it. And we can complex it with a sulfate from sulfuric acid, or we could complex it with a bicarbonate from an alkaline solution. Either way, the uranyl ion is going to form a large complex that's then stable in solution. The advantage of the low pH or acidic leach is that it's just much more effective on a broader spectrum of uranium mineralization. Uraninite and coffinite are the most common uranium minerals formed in these roll front type deposits. Our formation is a little older than the typical uranium formation or deposit in the Powder River Basin, and there's been some alteration of uranium mineral over time. So we found that we can capture a greater percentage of our uranium or dissolve a greater percentage of our uranium in the more aggressive acidic leach solutions than we could with the alkaline. So switching from alkaline leach solutions to the lower pH or acidic solutions means that we can get a higher recovery rate from our uranium that's underground in a shorter amount of time. And that drives better economics.
I again, in my Googling research for this call, I looked up some of the minerals in the Powder River Basin, and my eye glossed over a kind of a suite of relatively complex names of minerals I've never heard of. But I guess that's part of the alteration suite that you have established get recovered better with the acidic leach. Now, what was evident from kind of history is that every operation in the Powder River Basin or in Wyoming had operated on an alkali leach, and that's presumably led you down that alkali route when you were doing the 2018 feasibility study.
Actually, the 2018 was a low pH, but the project, the Lance project, just to be clear on history, was developed as an alkaline chemistry, just like every other U.S. project. But it was developed and constructed and put into operations in 2015. So it's a very young operation. It became clear during the operations in 2016 and 2017 that we weren't recovering the full amount of uranium that we were seeing underground, and that a change of chemistry would be desirable. While the United States in-situ recovery industry focused on alkaline chemistry over the years, and I grew up in that, around the world, whether it be Australia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Russia, China, other nations that practice in-situ recovery, they all use the low pH or acidic chemistry because it is more effective in addressing the uranium mineral. And like I said earlier, you can dissolve
a number of species.
Yes, a greater percentage of your uranium minerals in a shorter time frame.
Okay.
So we at Peninsula took the decision to drive the low pH chemistry at our site and be the industry leader in the United States with respect to that.
Do you have any kind of buffering gang minerals that are causing neutralization of the acids, or talk me a little bit about kind of what the challenges have been and where the breakthroughs have come and the well spacing?
Absolutely. A great question, Merlin. Typically we see carbonates, carbonate minerals in the formation, and carbonates drive acid consumption. Carbonates neutralize acid. So one of the features of the Lance project, which was beneficial for us, but also really differentiating us from the other Powder River Basin deposits, was a relatively low level of carbonates in our ore. We can manage the acid consumption because of relatively low carbonates. As a rule of thumb, if an ore body was less than 2% carbonate mineral, you could afford to do a low pH chemistry. Getting above 2%, you're going to start driving some pretty high acid consumptions, and acid's going to become a very significant component of your costs. In our case, we were about 1.5% carbonate, or 1 to 1.5% over the ore body, over the larger trends, and it works for us. A lot of the deposits that I've worked at in the past in the United States are 3-4% carbonate minerals, and that's really what drove the U.S. industry to go to alkaline chemistry rather than acidic chemistry. It was the high carbonates in our ores. And
where do you get your acid from? Is there a kind of an acid market in the U.S.?
Oh, there certainly is, and there's regional production of acid. Neighboring states, Utah and such, there's availability of acids for us. We haven't gone to full commercial production, so we'll begin to test the acid markets in the near future. But there's availability from neighboring states that are producing acid. A lot of sulfur byproducts from oil and gas productions, and and the western states, Wyoming included, is a significant oil and gas producer.
Silly me, as I asked the question, I realized I had the answer available to me if the neurons were working. But I guess that number will come out in the feasibility study. You'll have a kind of a cost for the acid, and that'll be fleshed out in the feasibility study.
Yeah, and look, in our 2018 low pH feasibility study, we've been looking at this for quite some time now, but we took the assumption that the United States acid markets, there's going to be more consumption than there is production, and that the United States is a net importer of sulfuric acid. So for our feasibility study, we actually took the cost of sulfuric acid from the Gulf Coast and shipped it up to us as a cost basis. That meant that we were being very conservative as to what the total cost might be for us, since there is acid available in our neighboring states, transportation and pricing being a lot less probably. But all in all, we take a pretty conservative approach to our acid cost modeling.
Oh yes, what are the key changes from the 2018 feasibility study to the one? Is it well spacing? Sorry, it was my bad for not picking up that it was a low pH study in 2018. So what are the critical changes that you've remodeled and reworked for this iteration?
Since 2018, we've continued to put a lot of time and effort into technically de-risking this project. First we ran a field leach trial, which allowed us to, in the field at a field scale, drive the pH, from its baseline condition down to where we need to be for operating. So we were able to get a good view of chemical or reagent consumption on the field demonstration. And then in that field leach trial, we also increased the pH back up so that we could do groundwater restoration activities at a higher pH, but demonstrate our capabilities of successfully completing groundwater restoration. After the field leach trial, we decided to do a second field demonstration with some ideas and some learnings from the field leach trial. And we took a area that had not been previously mined. So we had a virgin ore situation, and we again ran the field demonstration for about 18 months, from the middle of 2020 to the end of 2021. Again, we gained field knowledge of a complete recovery curve. We got field experience with pattern spacing, which you brought up, but is very important. The distance between the injection wells and the recovery wells, and how you put your injection well patterns geographically over the ore body. It's the geography of the pattern more than just the spacing. So we learned a lot about that, and we'll be able to apply all of the learnings. The 2018 feasibility model was based on laboratory results. The 2022 feasibility report will be based on field results.
And when you talk about the geography of those recovery wells and injection wells, is that based on the kind of the irregular shape of the field or the ore body?
It is, and sometimes broad sweeping patterns that go over areas that are non-mineralized are okay. Sometimes you really have to be very precise in your targeting of the mineralization. I think with the low pH, we've learned that, and we want to be very precise with our pattern designs, and rather than using large 5-spot or hexagonal patterns, a 5-spot would be like the number 5 on a dice. You have four and then one in the middle. You have four corner injectors surrounding a central recovery well. That would be a 5 spot. We're finding that crossing the patterns with what we call staggered line drives, where we inject across the pattern and back and forth across the pattern, is a more efficient way to address our ore body. It's a more efficient use of wells, and it also ends up with a more efficient chemical consumption profile.
Thank you. And have you published kind of any recovery data? I don't want to kind of trigger a news release, but in your news releases, have you kind of talked about ongoing recovery rates? And what's your median or average grade? I saw that it was between kind of 500 and 2,500 ppm, but
no, our average grade is down on the lower end towards the 500 parts per million in the ore grade. Ore grade is important, and particularly important in conventional mining. In situ recovery, it's much more forgiving. One of the advantages of in situ recovery is that you can address much lower grade ore bodies because you're not physically removing ore. You're not digging it up. You're not transporting it to a mill. You're just using patterns of wells to address the ore body. So in situ recovery is typically done on a much lower grade ore and yields very good economics on lower grade ores. So I'm not sure if I hit the question.
I know that recoveries in these things declines over time, and that once you've leached a certain proportion, then it's harder to get the remaining recovery on the lower proportion or lower grade. But
oh yeah, so I'm sorry.
What are your about yield curves really?
What our overall recovery might be, and there are some inherent inefficiencies with sweeping across ore bodies. Typically, in the alkaline, we were expecting as much as 70% recovery of the uranium using the alkaline. We were hitting closer to 50%, which was why we looked at different chemistries. With the acidic chemistry or the low pH chemistry, we were successful in the laboratory of hitting 95 to 99% recovery of the uranium mineralization, and with laboratory leach tests, and that's translated very well in the field as well. There's still inefficiencies, but as a whole, we'll look at somewhere between 80 and 90% recovery rather than the lower mark that we were seeing with the alkaline chemistry.
Great, and presumably once you've recovered your capital, you can keep leaching the remaining bit as long as the recovered uranium is less than your reagent costs.
That's right. The process itself is very inexpensive. When you're circulating solutions that are down in the low pH range, and all your costs are primarily labor and electricity. I've operated facilities with less than 10 parts per million of uranium returns in the production solutions, and had incremental break even or better, costs. So your ability in these facilities to run at very low solution grades is only limited by your plant's capacity. If you're trying to produce uranium at 1 million or 2 million pound per year rate, you have to maintain a reasonably good solution grade. So, ultimate recovery versus economics is a question of ongoing production rates. You replace well fields when they reach a 20 part per million grade or something like that.
Yeah.
And you run an average grade of 50, 60, 70 ppm into your facility. So you always have some fresh new well fields and some older well fields, bringing the average to a midpoint that generates your million or whatever target pounds per year that you're trying to produce.
And from the old feasibility study, the phase one kind of £1.5 million a year had a tiny capex up front, $5 million. Let's say it doubles to 10 million Is that still kind of the plan, to go for 1.5 million as your starting point?
Today's uranium market is incentivizing higher production rates. I'll put that right up front. So we're considering ramping our project up to a higher production rate, very quickly in our revised feasibility study. That's one of the options that we might come out with. The plant today is built for that 1.1 million pound per year production rate. So, anything above 1.1 million pounds per year will require some more upfront capital. But the beauty of Lance today is, as you pointed out, extremely low capital to transition our facility from alkaline to low pH. The facility was built in 2015. It's a modern facility that doesn't have any, old parts and pieces that need to be replaced. We just had to transition wetted parts that, to make sure that they're compatible with the low pH solutions, not just the alkaline solutions, because there's, corrosivity differences in those solutions. So, and because it's not much of an investment, it's also a very rapid time frame. Our 2018 feasibility study indicated that we were around $6 million in 6 months from an investment decision back into production as low pH. So we sit with a modern facility that has a very low capital requirement and a very short time frame to put the project back into production.
So feasibility study later this year, production next year?
Quite possibly. I can't commit to that because that decision hasn't been made, but we're on track to release a feasibility study in the third quarter of this year. And
no red flags suggesting that won't be the case. Nothing spooking you with a technical head on. Well,
no, because we've spent the last 3-4 years technically de-risking. And the point of the updating the feasibility study is to take all of the learnings that we've invested in the last several years and put them into a new study, an update. So, the hardest thing for the industry right now is, as for pretty much any industry, is facing the inflationary pressures that we see in the markets and the supply chain disruptions that we see in the markets. These are very real. The cost of sulfuric acid is up quite a bit from, but we used a very high starting point, in our 2018 feasibility study. So we feel a little bit protected from that impact in going forward. And it's not going to last forever. Sulfuric acid isn't going to always be at a high price or a high point, like it is today. So we have to use some good judgments in our feasibility study assessments. But a lot of the supplies and consumables that go into a successful in-situ recovery project are today in tight demand. So, a lot of advanced planning, a lot of thoughtfulness will go into the feasibility study.
Again, it's useful having a very low capex, and I guess the key variable, as you've discussed, is the variables, the variable cost elements, which are the kind of reagents like acid. What's your uranium price forecast? Sorry, not your forecast, but what are you going to be using in your feasibility study?
It hasn't been decided yet. There's, the price of uranium has been very dynamic in recent months. We've seen the price now, the spot price reaching $60 a pound. I can tell you, when we did the 2018 feasibility study, that our long-term price for uranium was $50. So today the price of uranium is over what our 2018 feasibility study mark was. Clearly we have justification for using higher pricing in our model. So NPV and IRR are going to be, reflective of better uranium markets that we see, in the days ahead. So this is a good time. I'll tell you, with inflationary pressures, with the changing in uranium price, uranium has been outpacing inflation. That's good for uranium producers. And, anybody who hasn't updated their feasibility study since, the middle of 2021, really probably should sit down and do so, because the world has been changing very quickly.
Well, Wayne, thank you very much. I've learned so much about ISR and roll front uranium in a very short space of time. I've learned a lot about the Lance project, and I look forward to seeing how the company reports over the next 6 months, and I look forward to that feasibility study.
Well, thanks, Merlin. We have a very transformational 12 months ahead of us with the launching of the project economics, and that all really is leading up to that final investment decision to put the project back into production. We think we could be one of the leaders in the U.S. industry with some of the earliest production. Today we have drill rigs on the site. We're doing a lot of pre-productional activity. Peninsula is very serious about the business we're in. We are, really a production geared company, oriented company, but we've spent the last several years where the uranium markets weren't so good, redeveloping our project and refining it to improve its performance moving into the future.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing more from you in due course.
My pleasure. Thank you.